Welcome to Sleepless Philosophers. Before the ideas begin, a small request: most of you who watch are not subscribed, and we've noticed this in the numbers, in the gap between views and the audience that stays. We post every single day. We put care into each script, each thought, each question that unfolds in the dark. And if these videos have become part of your nights, if they help you think or drift, or simply exist in that space between waking and sleep, consider subscribing, hitting the like button, turning on notifications so you know when the next one arrives. And if you feel moved to do so, leave a comment. Tell us where you're watching from. What philosophical question occupies your mind the most? What idea you return to when everything else falls away? These small gestures matter more than you might think. They allow this work to continue. They allow these ideas to reach others like you, scattered across the world, awake in the quiet hours. Now the introduction ends and the philosophy begins. Belief does not wait for evidence, does not require justification, does not emerge from careful reasoning, but appears fully formed, arrives with conviction intact, and only afterward does the mind scramble to find reasons, to construct arguments, to build the scaffolding of rationality around a conclusion that was never reached through rationality in the first place. And this sequence is backward from what is taught, from what people believe about their own thinking, from the narrative that says humans are rational creatures who form beliefs by weighing evidence and following logic to wherever it leads. But the narrative is false, is a story the conscious mind tells about processes. It does not control and barely witnesses, because the formation of belief happens beneath awareness, happens in systems that operate according to principles that have nothing to do with truth and everything to do with survival, with coalition, with identity, with the deep need to belong to a group and signal loyalty to that group through the adoption of its beliefs. And the adoption is not chosen, is not deliberate, is automatic, is the result of exposure and repetition and emotional resonance. And once a belief is formed, it becomes self-protecting, becomes resistant to challenge, becomes the lens through which all subsequent information is filtered. And the filter is not neutral, does not simply organize data, but actively distorts it, amplifies what confirms, and minimizes what contradicts. And this distortion is not dishonesty, but cognition, is the normal operation of a mind that is not designed to find truth, but to maintain coherence, to protect existing beliefs from disintegration, to avoid the cognitive and social costs of changing one's mind. And the costs are high, are often higher than the costs of being wrong, because being wrong in private is invisible, but changing one's mind in public is betrayal, is defection, is the signal that one is unreliable, is not committed, is willing to abandon the group. And groups punish this, punish uncertainty, punish the appearance of wavering, reward certainty even when the certainty is unjustified, especially when it is unjustified. Because justified certainty requires evidence, and evidence is ambiguous, and ambiguity is threatening to group cohesion, but unjustified certainty, certainty that comes from faith, from commitment, from identity, is the strongest signal of loyalty, is the proof that one believes not because the evidence compels, but because the group demands, and this demand is the engine of belief, is what makes convictions stick, what makes them resistant to argument, what makes smart people believe wrong things, not despite their intelligence, but because of it, because intelligence is a tool, and tools can be used for any purpose, including the purpose of defending beliefs that were never formed through intelligence in the first place. And the defense is sophisticated, is elaborate, is often more complex than the defenses offered by less intelligent believers, because the intelligent mind has more resources, more information, more ability to construct rationalizations that sound convincing, that appear logical, that give the impression of having been arrived at through careful thought when really they are working backward from a conclusion that was never in question. And the conclusion was never in question because it was not a conclusion but a premise, was not the end of reasoning but the beginning, was the starting point that determined which evidence would be noticed, which arguments would be persuasive, which authorities would be trusted. And trust is not distributed evenly across all sources, but is allocated according to alignment, according to whether the source supports the belief or challenges it. And sources that support are credible, are reliable, are worth listening to, while sources that challenge are biased, are corrupt, are motivated by hidden agendas. And this asymmetry is not recognized by the believer, is not seen as bias but as discernment, as the ability to distinguish good information from bad. And the distinguishing is easy because good information is information that confirms, and bad information is information that contradicts. And this is motivated reasoning, is the process by which the mind arrives at the conclusions it wants to arrive at while maintaining the illusion of objectivity, the sense that the conclusion was forced by evidence rather than selected in advance, and the illusion is convincing, is believed by the person doing the reasoning, is not cynical manipulation, but sincere self-deception, is the mind fooling itself, because being fooled is useful, is adaptive, is what allows people to hold beliefs with confidence, even when the beliefs are unsupported, and confidence is what matters socially, is what others respond to, is what makes a belief persuasive, not because it's true but because it's held strongly, and strength of conviction is mistaken for strength of evidence, is treated as signal that the believer knows something, has access to information, has done the thinking, when really the strength comes from identity, from the fact that the belief is tied to who the person is, to what group they belong to what side they are on. And sides are not chosen through reasoning, are chosen through affiliation, through accidents of birth and circumstance, through exposure to certain narratives at formative moments. And once the side is chosen, the beliefs come with it, come as package, come as the price of membership. And the price is paid gladly, because membership is worth more than truth, is worth more than accuracy, is the thing that makes life meaningful, that provides identity, that offers protection. And protection requires conformity, requires that everyone in the group believes the same things, or at least claims to believe them. And the claiming becomes believing through repetition, through public commitment, through the performance of belief that eventually converts into genuine conviction. And the conversion happens without awareness, happens gradually, happens through the mechanism that psychologists call cognitive dissonance reduction, where the mind alters beliefs to match behavior because behavior is harder to change, is more visible, is more socially consequential, and so the internal adjusts to match the external, and what was performed becomes believed, and what was believed becomes identity. And identity is the deepest level, is the level at which challenge feels like attack, like assault on the self, and the self defends, mobilizes resources, recruits intelligence in service of protection, and intelligence is effective, is dangerous in this role, because it can construct arguments that are superficially compelling, that exploit real ambiguities in evidence, that find the weak points in opposing positions. And these arguments are not offered in search of truth, but in defense of identity. Are weapons, not tools, are designed to win, not to discover, and winning means making the other side look wrong, look foolish, look motivated by bias, and the accusation of bias is always available, is always applicable, because everyone is biased, everyone is motivated, everyone is reasoning from premises they did not choose, and cannot justify except by appeal to other premises they also did not choose. And so the accusations are symmetrical, are hurled back and forth without resolution, without movement, without any possibility of convergence, because convergence would require both sides to treat truth as the goal, to be willing to change their minds if evidence demanded it. But evidence never demands anything. Evidence is passive, is interpreted, is filtered through the beliefs that are already in place. And the beliefs that are already in place are determined by identity, by group membership, by tribal affiliation, And tribes do not care about truth, except insofar as truth claims serve tribal interests, serve to distinguish us from them, serve to mark boundaries, to maintain cohesion, to provide narratives that explain why we are good and they are bad, why our beliefs are justified and theirs are delusions. And the asymmetry is total, is never recognized as asymmetry, but always experienced as accurate perception, as seeing clearly while others are blind, and the blindness is attributed to stupidity or dishonesty or indoctrination, never to the same mechanisms that are operating in oneself, because one's own beliefs are transparent, are not seen as beliefs but as obvious facts, as the way things are, and the way things are is not up for debate, is not subject to revision, is the foundation on which everything else is built, and challenging the foundation threatens the structure, threatens everything. And so the challenge is rejected, is deflected, is met with hostility or mockery, or the dismissal that treats the challenger as not worth engaging, as beneath consideration, as so obviously wrong that responding would be a waste of time. And the waste is avoided, the belief is preserved, the identity is protected, and life continues with certainty intact, with the conviction that one is right, has always been right, will always be right, because being right is not a state that can be verified, but is a state that is claimed, is performed, is the stance that the group requires and the individual provides. And the providing is not sacrifice, but fulfillment, is not loss, but gain, is the way that belonging is achieved, is the way that meaning is found, is the way that the chaos of existence is organized into a coherent narrative where the self is on the right side, is part of the good, is aligned with truth, even if truth is never actually encountered, never actually sought, never actually valued except as a rhetorical weapon to use against opponents. And opponents are necessary, are required by the logic of tribal epistemology, are the ones whose wrongness confirms our rightness, whose existence justifies our beliefs, whose errors prove our accuracy, and the errors are easy to find, because looking for errors is what confirmation bias does, is the selective attention that notices everything that supports the belief and overlooks everything that contradicts it. And the overlooking is not deliberate, is not conscious suppression, but automatic filtering, is the mind attending to what it expects, what it is primed to see. And the priming comes from belief, comes from the framework that determines what is salient, what is relevant, what is worth noticing, and what is worth noticing is always what confirms, is always what can be incorporated into the narrative, and the narrative is not discovered but constructed, is built from selected pieces of evidence that are arranged to tell a story, and the story is always the same story, is always the one where we are right and they are wrong, where our beliefs are based on evidence and theirs are based on bias, where we are rational and they are emotional, where we are honest seekers of truth and they are motivated by power or fear, or some other corrupt motive, and the motives that are attributed to others are never attributed to the self, are never seen as operating in one's own reasoning, because one's own reasoning is transparent, is experienced as simply responding to facts, as following evidence, as arriving at conclusions that are forced rather than chosen, and the forcing is illusion, is the feeling that arises when motivated reasoning is operating smoothly, when the mind has successfully convinced itself that the conclusion it wanted to reach is the conclusion that evidence demands, and the demand is retroactive, is constructed after the fact, is the rationalization that makes the belief feel justified, that allows it to be held with confidence, that enables the believer to defend it against challenge and feel virtuous in the defending. And virtue is the reward, is what makes belief feel good, feel right, feel like something more than preference. And the more than preference is what gives belief its power, its capacity to motivate action, to organize communities, to inspire sacrifice, because preference can be changed, can be updated, can be revealed as merely subjective, but belief that is felt as knowledge, as truth, as correspondence to reality, is not subject to change, is not vulnerable to challenge, is the rock on which identity is built. And the rock is not geology but psychology, is not objective but constructed, is not discovered in the world but imposed on the world. And the imposition is what makes the world intelligible, what makes experience coherent, what prevents the vertigo of radical uncertainty. And uncertainty is intolerable, is the state that humans will do almost anything to avoid, will believe almost anything to escape. And the escape is into certainty, into conviction, into the feeling of knowing. And the feeling is what matters, is what provides comfort, is what makes belief functional regardless of whether it is true. And truth is a secondary concern, is something that is appealed to but not pursued, is a value that is claimed but not practiced, because practicing it would require epistemic humility, would require admitting that one could be wrong, that one's beliefs could be mistaken, that the group could be misguided. And these admissions are costly, are signals of weakness, are invitations for opponents to attack. An attack is what happens when certainty is dropped, when doubt is expressed, when the fortress of belief shows cracks and the cracks are not tolerated, are repaired immediately, are filled with rationalizations and justifications, and appeals to authority. And authority is not expertise but alignment, is not knowledge but membership, is the voice of the group speaking through individuals who have internalized its beliefs so thoroughly that they cannot distinguish their own thoughts from the thoughts they were given. And the giving is not noticed, is not experienced as indoctrination, but as education, as the transmission of knowledge, as the inheritance of wisdom. And wisdom is what every group claims to possess, is the special access to truth that justifies its existence, that explains why belonging matters, why loyalty is required, why defection is unforgivable. And the unforgivable is treated with expulsion, with shunning, with the withdrawal of recognition that makes social existence possible. And the possibility of this withdrawal is what keeps believers in line, keeps them performing the beliefs, even when doubt arises, even when evidence contradicts, even when the rational part of the mind recognizes that the belief is unsupported, because the rational part is weak, is outvoted by the social part, by the emotional part, by the parts that understand that survival depends on belonging, and belonging depends on belief. And so belief is maintained, is performed, is protected against challenge, not because it is true, but because it's necessary, is the price of membership, is the cost of identity, and the cost is paid continuously, is paid in the suppression of doubt, in the dismissal of contrary evidence, in the construction of elaborate rationalizations that allow the belief to persist despite its failures, despite its contradictions, despite the mounting evidence that it is wrong, and wrong is what every belief eventually becomes, is the fate of all convictions that are held rigidly, that refuse to update, that treat themselves as final, as complete, as not subject to revision, because the world changes, because evidence accumulates, because what was plausible becomes implausible, and the implausible becomes undeniable, and the undeniable is denied anyway, is rejected through the mechanisms of motivated reasoning that are so powerful, so sophisticated, so effective at maintaining belief in the face of counter-evidence that they can preserve convictions long after those convictions have ceased to correspond to anything in reality. And the lack of correspondence does not matter, does not affect the strength of belief, does not reduce confidence, because belief is not about correspondence, is not about mapping the world accurately, is about maintaining identity, maintaining belonging, maintaining the narratives that make the group cohere. And coherence is more important than accuracy, is more valuable than truth, is what holds communities together, what makes collective action possible, what allows humans to coordinate at scale. And scale requires shared belief, requires that everyone is operating from the same assumptions, the same frameworks, the same narratives, and the sharing is not achieved through evidence, but through repetition, through ritual, through the constant reinforcement of the beliefs that define the group. And the reinforcement is everywhere, is in the stories that are told, the heroes that are celebrated, the enemies that are vilified, the history that is remembered and the history that is forgotten, and the remembering and forgetting are selective, are curated to support the narrative, to make the group look good, to make its beliefs seem justified, seem necessary, seem like the only reasonable position. And reasonableness is performance, is the appearance of having arrived at belief through rational process, when really the process is post hoc, is the construction of justification for conclusions that were reached through identity, through emotion, through the non-rational processes that govern most of human belief. And the most is almost all, is the vast majority of what people believe, is believed not because evidence compels, but because believing is required, is expected, is the condition of membership in the groups that provide meaning and purpose and protection. And without these groups, the individual is lost, is isolated, is without framework, without narrative, without the stories that make sense of suffering, that explain why things happen, that provide hope that the future will be better, or at least that the struggle is meaningful. And meaning is what belief provides, is the primary function, is more important than accuracy, more valuable than truth. Because humans can tolerate being wrong, but cannot tolerate meaninglessness, cannot survive without the sense that life is going somewhere, that actions matter, that the side they are on is the right side, and the right side is always the side they are on, is always the group they belong to, is determined by belonging rather than determining it. And this circularity is invisible, is not recognized as circularity, but experienced as logical necessity, as the way things obviously are. And the obvious is what is most suspect, is what most needs examination, is where belief is most rigid, most defended, most immune to challenge, because the obvious is the foundation, is the premise that cannot be questioned without everything else collapsing, and collapse is unacceptable, is the threat that keeps belief in place, that makes certainty feel like safety and doubt feel like danger. And so certainty wins, always. Wins not because it is right, but because it is functional, is what the mind needs to operate, to make decisions, to navigate the world. And navigation does not require truth, only requires consistency, requires beliefs that are stable enough to be acted upon. And stability is what identity provides, is what tribal epistemology achieves, is the freezing of belief into doctrine, into dogma, into the unquestionable truths that define the group and exclude the other. And exclusion is the point, is the function, is what makes identity possible. Because identity is not what you are, but what you're not, is defined by boundaries, by the line that separates us from them, believers from heretics, the enlightened from the deluded. And the delusion is always on the other side, is always what they suffer from, never what afflicts us, because we see clearly we have truth, we are right, and the rightness is not a conclusion but a premise, is not the end of inquiry, but the foreclosing of inquiry, is the state that belief aims for and maintains through every mechanism available, through confirmation bias, through motivated reasoning, through tribal epistemology, through the subordination of truth to identity. And the subordination is complete, is total, is the condition of believing anything at all. Because belief without evidence is not the exception, but the rule is not a failure of reasoning, but the normal operation of minds that are not designed for truth, but for survival, for belonging, for the construction of narratives that make life bearable. And bearable is all that is required, is all that can be expected, is the standard that belief meets regardless of whether it meets any other standard, and other standards are luxuries, are the concerns of those who have the security to question, to doubt, to examine their beliefs, without fearing the social consequences. But most do not have this security. Most cannot afford doubt, cannot risk uncertainty, cannot survive without the conviction that they are right, that their beliefs are justified, that the group they belong to has access to truth. And the access is never demonstrated, never verified, never subjected to test, is only asserted, only performed, only maintained through the constant repetition of the beliefs that constitute the group. And the constitution is circular, is self-referential, is the tautology that defines all tribal epistemology. That we are right because we believe what we believe, and we believe what we believe because we are right. And the circle is unbreakable from within, can only be seen from outside. From the perspective of someone who does not share the belief, who has not internalized the identity, who can see the mechanisms operating, and the seeing changes. Nothing convinces no one, because the believer is not operating from evidence and cannot be swayed by evidence, is operating from identity and can only be swayed by changes in identity, by shifts in belonging, by the rare and difficult transformation that allows a person to leave one group and join another, to abandon one set of beliefs and adopt another. And the adoption is not reasoned, but is the same non-rational process operating in a different direction, is the formation of new convictions without evidence, is the replacement of one certainty with another certainty. And the certainty is what matters, is what the mind needs, is what belief provides, regardless of content, regardless of truth, regardless of anything except the function of making the world intelligible, making the self coherent, making belonging possible. And possibility is all that belief promises, is all that it delivers, is the opening of a space where life can be lived with conviction, with purpose, with the sense that one knows what is true and what is false, what is good and what is evil, what side to be on and what side to oppose, and the opposition is necessary, is required by the structure of belief, is what makes belief matter, what gives it weight, what makes it worth defending, worth fighting for, worth holding on to, even when every rational consideration suggests it should be abandoned, because abandoning belief is abandoning identity, is abandoning belonging, is abandoning meaning, and meaning is what makes existence tolerable, is what makes life worth living. And this worth is not measured in truth, but in function, not in correspondence, but in coherence, not in accuracy, but in the capacity to organize experience into narratives that can be shared, that can be believed, that can be held, with the conviction that comes not from evidence but from faith. And faith is not the opposite of reason, but its foundation is the ground on which all reasoning occurs, is the set of premises that cannot themselves be justified but must be assumed, must be taken on faith, must be believed without evidence, because evidence requires premises, and premises require faith, and the faith is inescapable, is built into the structure of belief, is what makes belief possible, is what makes the mechanics of belief mechanical, automatic, operating below awareness, producing convictions that arrive fully formed and are only later dressed in the clothing of reason, given the appearance of having been derived from evidence when really they were derived from identity, from belonging, from the deep and desperate human need to be part of something larger, to believe something strongly, to know with certainty, even if the knowing is illusion, and the certainty is performance, and the belief is wrong. Attention has become currency, has become the raw material that corporations extract and refine and sell. And this transformation happened quietly, happened gradually, happened so smoothly that most people did not notice they were becoming the product, did not realize that their consciousness had been colonized, that the hours of their lives were being auctioned to the highest bidder, that every moment of awareness was being monetized by platforms designed not to inform or connect or entertain, but to harvest, to capture, to hold the gaze for as long as possible and convert that holding into profit. And the genius of this system is that it does not feel like exploitation, does not feel like theft, feels instead like choice, like freedom, like the vast menu of options that modernity provides. But the choice is curated, is algorithmically optimized, is designed to keep the user inside the platform, inside the feed, inside the cycle of stimulus and response that generates data. And the data is what matters. The data is what gets sold. the clicks and scrolls and pauses and searches that reveal preferences, reveal psychology, reveal the patterns that allow prediction. And prediction is control, is the ability to shape behavior, to nudge decisions, to make certain choices more likely than others. And this happens below the level of awareness, happens in the gap between stimulus and response, happens so quickly that by the time consciousness arrives to claim authorship of the decision has already been made, has been influenced by factors that were carefully engineered to be invisible, to operate in the blind spots of perception. And the engineers are not evil, are not villains, are just optimizing, are just doing what they are hired to do, which is maximize engagement. And engagement is measured in time, in how many minutes per day the user spends inside the system. And the system is very good at maximizing this metric, has been refined through millions of iterations, has been tested on billions of users, has discovered principles of human psychology that academic researchers never found, because researchers have ethics committees and platforms have incentives, and the incentive is to find the exact frequency of reward that keeps behavior going, the exact ratio of novelty to familiarity that prevents habituation, the exact level of difficulty that maintains interest without causing frustration, and these parameters are adjusted in real time, are personalized for each user, are tuned to the individual vulnerabilities that the data reveals. And what the data reveals is that humans are predictable, are hackable, are machines that respond to inputs in ways that can be modeled and exploited. And the exploitation is not illegal, is not even considered unethical by the standards of the industry, is just business, just capitalism, just the market finding new territory to colonize. And the territory is consciousness, is the hours of the day that used to be empty, used to be boring, used to be filled with thought or rest or staring at walls. And these empty hours were not profitable, were not monetizable, were wastes from an economic perspective, and so they had to be filled, had to be captured, had to be converted into engagement. And the tools for this conversion are apps, are platforms, are devices that promise connection and deliver isolation, promise information and deliver distraction, promise empowerment and deliver addiction. And the addiction is not metaphorical, is not exaggeration, is literal, is the same neural pathways, the same dopamine dynamics, the same withdrawal symptoms that characterize substance addiction. And the platforms know this, have hired neuroscientists and psychologists to make the products more addictive, more compelling, more difficult to resist, and resistance is framed as weakness, as lack of self-control, as personal failing. But this framing obscures the asymmetry of power, obscures the fact that individuals are competing against teams of PhDs with unlimited resources and sophisticated tools. And in this competition, the individual always loses, always ends up scrolling, always ends up checking, always ends up giving the platform what it wants, which is attention. And attention is finite, is the one resource that cannot be manufactured or expanded, is strictly limited by the hours in a day and the capacity of the nervous system. And so the competition for attention is zero-sum, is a war where every platform is fighting every other platform, and all of them are fighting against sleep and work and relationships and anything else that might occupy consciousness. And the platforms are winning, are capturing more hours every year, are extending their reach into moments that used to be sacred, used to be protected, used to be offline. And offline is becoming a luxury, is becoming something only the wealthy can afford, because opting out requires discipline and alternatives and the knowledge that opting out is even possible. And most people do not have this knowledge, do not see the system, do not recognize that their attention is being farmed. And even those who do recognize it often cannot escape, cannot resist, because the platforms are too useful, too convenient, too integrated into the infrastructure of modern life. And to reject them is to reject participation, to accept isolation, to make life harder in exchange for autonomy. And most choose convenience over autonomy, choose connection over sovereignty, choose the platform over the void. And the void is what waits in the absence of stimulation, is what the constant connectivity is designed to prevent, is boredom, is the experience of being alone with the unoccupied mind. And boredom has become intolerable, has become something to be avoided at all costs. And the cost is attention, is consciousness, is the capacity to think without distraction, to feel without mediation, to simply be without needing external input. And this capacity is atrophying, is declining with each generation, is being bred out by an environment that never stops demanding response, that never allows rest, that treats every moment of inactivity as opportunity, as potential engagement that must be captured. And the capturing is called user experience, is called interface design, is called growth hacking. And these terms sanitize what is happening, make it sound technical rather than predatory, make it sound like optimization rather than exploitation. But the experience of the user is not optimized for the user, is optimized for the platform, is designed to extract maximum value from minimum input. And the value extracted is not just attention, but data, not just time, but information, not just engagement, but identity, because the platforms know things about their users that the users do not know about themselves, have models of personality and preference that are more accurate than self-report. And these models are sold, are licensed, are used to manipulate. And the manipulation is called advertising, but is really behavior modification, is the application of psychological principles to make certain actions more likely. And the actions are clicking and buying and voting and believing. And what is believed is whatever the algorithm decides to show. Whatever content the model predicts will generate engagement. And engagement means time, means attention, means the user staying inside the system. And the system has learned that outrage generates engagement, that fear generates engagement, that tribalism and conflict and moral certainty generate engagement. And so these are what the algorithm promotes, what the feed becomes filled with, not because the platform wants a more divided world, but because division is profitable, keeps people scrolling, keeps people arguing, keeps attention captured. And the captured attention is sold to advertisers who want to change behavior, who want to make people buy products they do not need, believe things that are not true, vote for candidates who do not serve their interests. And the system works, is terrifyingly effective, has changed elections, has changed culture, has changed what people think is real, and reality is becoming whatever the algorithm amplifies, whatever goes viral, whatever captures attention long enough to become part of the discourse. And the discourse is not conversation but performance, not exchange but broadcast, not thinking but reacting. And reaction is what the system wants, is faster than reflection, is more primitive, is easier to predict and manipulate. And so the environment rewards reaction, punishes reflection, makes it difficult to think slowly, to consider carefully, to withhold judgment. And the result is a population that is always responding, always reacting, always engaged but never thoughtful, never deliberate, never in control of their own attention. And attention is the foundation of everything else, is what makes learning possible, makes relationships possible, makes meaning possible. And when attention is colonized, everything built on attention becomes precarious, becomes shallow, becomes vulnerable to collapse. And the collapse is already happening, is visible in the epidemic of anxiety and depression, in the inability to focus, in the fragmentation of identity, in the sense that life is accelerating, that there is never enough time, that something important is being lost, but it is not clear what or how to get it back. And what is being lost is sovereignty, is the right to one's own consciousness, the right to choose what to pay attention to, rather than having attention hijacked, manipulated, sold. And the platforms will say that users have choice, that no one is forced to use these services, that opting out is always possible. But this is disingenuous, is like saying that people choose to breathe polluted air because they could move, could leave the city, could find somewhere clean. And technically, this is true, but practically, it ignores the structure of power. ignores that the environment has been changed in ways that make certain choices extremely costly, that opting out of the attention economy means opting out of employment, education, social connection, civic participation, and so the choice is not really a choice, is coerced by circumstance, by the fact that the platforms have become infrastructure, have become the roads on which modern life travels, and to refuse them is to refuse modernity, to accept marginalization, and most cannot afford this refusal, and so they stay, keep scrolling, keep checking, keep giving away their attention, and receiving in return the feeling of being connected, being informed, being free, when really they are isolated, distracted, captured, and the freedom is the freedom of the hamster wheel, the freedom to run without going anywhere, the freedom to choose between options that have all been curated to serve the same end, and the end is profit, is the conversion of attention into money, is the monetization of consciousness itself. And this monetization was not possible before, was not technically feasible, required technologies that did not exist, required smartphones and algorithms, and the infrastructure to track and analyze and predict behavior in real time. And now that the infrastructure exists, it will not be dismantled, will not be voluntarily abandoned, because it's too valuable, too profitable, too central to the business models of the most powerful corporations in history. And these corporations are not accountable to users, are accountable to shareholders, and shareholders care about growth, care about returns, care about the numbers going up, and the numbers go up when engagement goes up, when attention is captured more effectively, when the competition is crushed and the market is monopolized, and monopoly is what has been achieved, is what the platform economy tends toward, because platforms benefit from network effects, from being where everyone else is, and this creates winner-take-all dynamics, creates situations where one or two platforms dominate, and alternatives cannot compete, cannot offer enough value to overcome the switching costs. And so the users are locked in, are prisoners of convenience, are unable to leave without losing access to the networks that have become essential. And the platforms know this, exploit this, degrade the experience slowly, introduce features that users hate but tolerate because the alternative is worse, is disconnection, and disconnection is unthinkable, has become synonymous with isolation, has become the thing that the attention economy promises to save us from while actually delivering it, because connection through a screen is not connection, is simulation of connection, is the appearance without the substance, is the feeling without the reality, and the reality is that real connection requires presence, requires attention that is not divided, not distracted, not mediated by an algorithm that is optimizing for something other than the relationship. And such attention is becoming rare, is becoming a gift that few can afford to give, because attention is the thing being taken, is the thing being sold, is the thing that there is never enough of, because it is always being redirected, always being pulled toward the next notification, the next update, the next thing designed to capture and hold and extract, and the extraction is invisible, feels like nothing, feels like just a moment, just a quick check, just staying informed, but the moments accumulate, the checks compound, and hours dissolve into fragmented minutes, into broken attention that cannot sustain thought, cannot maintain focus, cannot build anything that requires depth or complexity or sustained engagement. And depth is what is being lost, is what the attention economy is incompatible with, because depth requires time, requires the ability to stay with difficulty, to tolerate confusion, to sit with questions that do not have immediate answers. And the platforms cannot tolerate this, cannot allow users to sit, must keep them moving, must keep them scrolling, must keep them in the state of perpetual seeking that never finds, perpetual consuming that never satisfies. And satisfaction is the enemy, is what would cause the user to stop, to disengage, to leave the platform. And so satisfaction must be prevented, must be deferred, must be replaced with the promise of satisfaction, with the feeling that the next thing will be the thing, the next scroll will reveal something worth the time, and this promise is never fulfilled, is never intended to be fulfilled, is the mechanism that keeps the machine running, keeps the user trapped in the loop. An escape requires recognizing the loop, requires seeing the mechanism, requires understanding that the feeling of freedom is the trap, that the choice is the cage, that the attention economy is not serving the user but is using the user, is extracting value and leaving behind exhaustion, fragmentation, the sense that life is happening somewhere else, to someone else, and the screen is a window onto that other life, but never a door, never a way through, only a way to watch, to consume, to experience vicariously, and vicarious experience is not experience, is its negation, is the replacement of doing with watching, of living with scrolling, of being with performing, and performance is what the platforms demand. Demand the curation of identity, the presentation of self that is always positive, always successful, always enviable, and this performance is exhausting, is alienating, is the source of the anxiety that drives people back to the platforms looking for relief. And the platforms provide relief in the form of more content, more distraction, more opportunities to forget that the self being performed is not the self being lived, that the gap between them is growing, that authenticity is becoming impossible in an environment that punishes vulnerability and rewards spectacle. And spectacle is what the algorithm amplifies. What goes viral, what captures attention at scale, and attention at scale is what matters, is what generates revenue, is what makes certain voices loud and others silent, and the silence is not absence but erasure, is the algorithmic decision that certain content does not generate engagement, does not deserve distribution, does not align with the platform's interests, and interests are commercial, are about keeping users inside the system, and anything that might cause users to leave, to think, to question, to disconnect, is deprioritized, is hidden, is effectively censored not by decree but by code, by the automated decisions of systems that have no conception of truth or value or importance, only of engagement, and engagement is the wrong metric, is optimizing for the wrong thing, is maximizing time spent rather than time well spent, and the distinction matters because not all attention is equal. Some attention is nourishing and some is depleting. Some makes life richer and some makes it poorer, but the algorithm cannot distinguish, does not care, measures only duration and intensity. And intensity is easy to generate through outrage, through fear, through the triggering of emotions that demand response, and so the feed becomes a stream of triggers, becomes designed to provoke, to upset, to capture attention through the primitive circuits that evolved to detect threat. And these circuits are not designed for the modern world, are designed for a world where threats were physical, immediate, escapable, not abstract, permanent, global, and the mismatch creates chronic activation, creates a state of perpetual vigilance that wears down the nervous system, that depletes resources, that makes rest impossible because the threats never stop, the feed never ends, the notifications never cease, and the only way to stop them is to disconnect, to turn off, to reclaim attention. But disconnection feels dangerous, feels like missing something, feels like falling behind, and falling behind is unacceptable in a culture that valorizes productivity, that measures worth in output, that treats every moment as resource to be optimized. And optimization means elimination of waste. And waste includes rest, includes boredom, includes the empty time that used to be when consciousness could wander, could explore, could discover itself. And this discovery is what is being prevented, is what the colonization of attention makes impossible. Because to know oneself requires attention turned inward, requires time that is not filled, requires boredom. And boredom is not absence, but presence, is the mind meeting itself without distraction, without mediation, without escape. And this meeting is where insight comes from, where creativity comes from, where meaning comes from. But the platforms cannot monetize insight, cannot sell creativity, cannot profit from meaning. And so these are sacrificed, are traded for engagement, for the illusion of productivity, for the feeling of being busy that is actually being used, being exploited, being colonized. And the colonization is complete when it becomes invisible, when it feels like nature, when the user cannot imagine life without the platform, cannot remember what attention felt like before it was captured, cannot conceive of consciousness that is not mediated, not monetized, not owned by someone else. And ownership is what has been achieved, is what the attention economy has accomplished, not through force but through design, through the slow accumulation of habits that become dependencies, through the gradual adjustment of expectations until constant connectivity feels normal and solitude feels strange. And strange is threatening, is to be avoided, is what the platform protects against, promises to eliminate, and the elimination is achieved, is total, is the end of privacy, the end of interiority, the end of the self that is not performing, not producing, not consuming. And what remains is the user, the node in the network, the data point in the model, the attention that is harvested and sold and never returned. And the question is whether this is sustainable, whether consciousness can survive colonization, whether attention can be extracted indefinitely without something breaking, and the breaking is already happening, is visible in the rising rates of mental illness, in the inability to be alone, in the desperation for distraction that feels like drowning, like suffocation, like something essential has been taken and cannot be recovered. And recovery would require resistance, would require the deliberate cultivation of boredom, the intentional creation of empty time, the radical act of doing nothing in a world that demands constant doing. And doing nothing is not laziness, but rebellion, is the refusal to participate, is the reclamation of sovereignty, is the assertion that attention is not for sale, that consciousness is not a resource, that the self has value independent of productivity, independent of engagement, independent of what can be extracted. And this assertion is difficult, is countercultural, is fighting against systems that are designed to prevent it. But it is possible, is necessary, is the only way to escape the colonization, to restore attention to its proper owner, to make consciousness sovereign again. And sovereignty is not isolation, but autonomy, is the right to choose, the right to refuse, the right to be bored, to be slow, to be present. And presence is what the attention economy destroys, is what cannot be monetized, is what makes life worth living. And without it, all the engagement in the world is empty, is meaningless, is just motion, just noise, just the sound of attention being sold. Privacy might be accident, might be the result of biological shielding rather than fundamental law, might be the consequence of frequencies that consciousness operates on being inaccessible to ordinary perception, but not inaccessible in principle, not impossible to detect, not inherently private, but only contingently private, only hidden because the mechanisms for detection have not evolved, have not been developed, have not been made accessible to awareness. And the awareness that some claim to have, that schizophrenics report, that people experiencing psychosis describe, might not be delusion, but might be the temporary or permanent loss of the shielding, the opening of the channels that are normally closed, the reception of signals that are normally filtered out. And the filtering is what protects privacy, is what keeps thoughts hidden, is what ensures that consciousness remains internal, but the internal might not be as secure as it seems, might not be as absolute as is assumed, might be vulnerable to detection, to interception, to the kind of broadcasting that paranoid individuals fear, and that psychiatric diagnosis dismisses as impossible, as symptom, as the misattribution of internal events to external sources. But what if the misattribution is correct? What if the internal events are external? What if thoughts are not confined to the skull, but are radiating outward on frequencies that some can detect, that some are sensitive to, that some cannot avoid detecting, and the detecting is experienced as hearing voices, as receiving transmissions, as being unable to stop the influx of thoughts that are not one's own, but are coming from others, from the environment, from the field of consciousness that might be shared rather than private, that might be collective rather than individual, that might be accessible to those whose shielding has failed, whose filters have broken, whose sensitivity has increased beyond the normal range. And the normal range is what most people experience, is the condition where thoughts feel private, feel internal, feel like they belong to the self and are not accessible to others. But this feeling might be illusion, might be the result of limited sensitivity, might be the consequence of biological constraints that prevent the detection of signals that are actually present, actually broadcasting, actually available to anyone with the right equipment, the right sensitivity, the right frequency. And the frequency is what matters, is what determines whether thoughts are visible or invisible, whether consciousness is private or public, whether the mind is sealed or permeable. And the permeable is what some experience, is what schizophrenics describe, is what people in psychosis report. And the reports are consistent, are describing the same phenomena across cultures, across time periods, across individuals who have no contact with each other. And the consistency is troubling, is suggesting that maybe the experiences are not entirely subjective, are not entirely generated by malfunctioning brains, but are detecting something real, something that is normally filtered out, something that exists in the environment, in the field, in the frequencies where consciousness operates. And the operating might be electromagnetic, might be quantum, might be something that physics has not yet characterized, but that biology is sensitive to, that nervous systems are tuned to, that brains are receiving and transmitting constantly. And the transmitting is what creates the possibility of thought broadcasting, is what makes privacy contingent rather than absolute, is what suggests that the experience of having thoughts that are one's own, that are hidden from others, that are safe from detection, might be the result of anatomical luck, might be the consequence of having filters that work, having shielding that holds, having a nervous system that is tuned to the right frequency and is not picking up the signals that are all around, that are being broadcast by every other conscious being, and the beings are transmitting without knowing, are radiating thoughts without intending, are creating a field of consciousness that is dense, that is crowded, that is full of signals that most cannot detect, but that some can, that some are cursed to detect, that some experience as invasion, as the loss of privacy, as the horrifying realization that thoughts are not safe, are not hidden, are not private, and the not private is what thought broadcasting delusion describes, is what paranoia is responding to, is what might be accurate perception rather than misperception, might be the detection of real signals rather than the hallucination of imaginary ones. And the imaginary is what psychiatry assumes, is what diagnosis requires, is the framework that treats all claims of thought broadcasting as symptoms of disorder, as evidence of psychosis, as the malfunctioning of the reality testing apparatus. But reality testing assumes knowledge of what reality is, assumes that the normal experience is the accurate experience, assumes that privacy is real, and that any perception of its violation is false. And the false might be the assumption, might be the belief that thoughts are private, might be the conviction that consciousness is sealed, when really consciousness is leaking, is broadcasting, is detectable to those who have the sensitivity. And the sensitivity is what varies, is what creates the spectrum, is what makes some people receivers and others transmitters, and most people neither. Most people shielded, most people operating on frequencies that do not overlap with others, that do not allow detection, that maintain the illusion of privacy. And the illusion is functional, is necessary, is what makes social life possible, because if everyone could detect everyone else's thoughts, then interaction would be impossible, would be overwhelming, would be the constant influx of signals that would drown out the ability to think, to focus, to maintain the sense of being an individual consciousness. And the individual is what privacy creates, is what shielding allows, is what makes the experience of being a separate self possible. And the separate might be illusion, might be the result of limited perception, might be what happens when the field of consciousness is filtered down to the signals that originate in one body, in one nervous system, in one brain. And the brain is creating the illusion of separation by filtering out everything else, by attending only to internal signals, by ignoring or suppressing the external signals that are always present, always available, always broadcasting. And the broadcasting is what some cannot ignore, cannot suppress, cannot filter out. And these are the ones who experience thought broadcasting, who hear voices, who feel that their privacy has been violated, and the violation might be real, might be the accurate perception that thoughts are not private, that consciousness is not sealed, that the mind is permeable to signals from the environment, from other minds, from the field that connects all consciousness. And the connecting is what thought broadcasting implies, is what the delusion is pointing toward, is the possibility that minds are not isolated but are networked, are not separate but are overlapping, are not private but are accessible to each other on frequencies that most cannot detect. And the detection is what would make privacy impossible, would make thought visible, would make consciousness public. And the public is what some are experiencing, is what some are reporting, is what psychiatry is dismissing as impossible, as symptom, as the product of malfunctioning brains. But what if the brains are not malfunctioning, but are functioning too well, are too sensitive, are detecting signals that are real, but are normally filtered out? And the filtering is what fails in psychosis, is what breaks in schizophrenia, is what allows the influx of thoughts that are not one's own, that are coming from others, that are being broadcast on frequencies that are normally inaccessible. And the inaccessible is what protects privacy, is what makes thoughts feel safe, is what creates the illusion that the mind is sealed, is private, is hidden from others. And the hidden might be temporary, might be contingent, might be the result of biological constraints that could be overcome, could be bypassed, could be eliminated through technology, through drugs, through practices that alter consciousness, that change sensitivity, that open the channels that are normally closed. And the opening is what some experience spontaneously, is what happens in psychosis, is what occurs when the filters fail. And the failing might not be pathological, but might be the revealing of a truth that is normally hidden, that is normally suppressed, that is incompatible with social functioning, but is accurate, is real, is showing that thoughts are not private, that consciousness is not individual, that the mind is part of a field that is shared, that is collective, that is accessible to anyone who has the sensitivity. And the sensitivity is what varies, is what creates the spectrum, is what determines whether thoughts are experienced as private or as public, as hidden or as visible, as safe or as vulnerable. And the vulnerable is what thought broadcasting feels like, is what the experience is the sense that privacy has been lost, that thoughts are exposed, that the mind is transparent to others. And the transparency might be real, might be accurate, might be the perception of a frequency where thoughts become visible, where consciousness is no longer hidden, where the illusion of privacy dissolves, and the dissolving is terrifying, is overwhelming, is experienced as invasion, as violation, as the loss of the boundary that makes the self feel separate, feel protected, feel safe. And the safety is what privacy provides, is what shielding creates, is what most people have and some people lack. And the lacking is what makes thought broadcasting possible, is what opens the channels, is what allows detection, and the detection is not imagined, but is real, is accurate, is perceiving signals that are present, that are broadcasting, that are coming from other minds, and the other minds are not aware that they are broadcasting, are not intending to transmit, are not trying to communicate, are just existing, just thinking, just being conscious, and the consciousness is radiating, is emitting signals, is creating a field that some can detect, that some are sensitive to, that some experience as voices, as thoughts that are not their own, as the influx of consciousness from outside, and the outside is everywhere, is surrounding, is the environment of minds that are all broadcasting, all transmitting, all creating signals that are normally filtered out, but that some can detect. And the detecting is what schizophrenics are doing, is what people in psychosis are experiencing, is what thought broadcasting is. And the broadcasting is real, is not delusion, is not symptom, is the accurate perception of a frequency where thoughts become visible, where consciousness is detectable, where privacy is lost. And the lost is what some experience, is what some report, is what psychiatry dismisses. But the dismissing might be wrong, might be the refusal to acknowledge a truth that is too disturbing, too threatening, too incompatible with the belief that thoughts are private, that minds are sealed, that consciousness is individual, and the individual might be illusion, might be the result of shielding, might be what most people experience because their filters work, because their sensitivity is limited, because they are operating on frequencies that do not overlap with others, and the others are there, are broadcasting, are detectable to those who have the sensitivity. And the sensitivity is what the Soviets were researching, is what psychic warfare experiments were trying to exploit, is what programs like M-Cultura were investigating, is the possibility that thoughts can be detected, can be influenced, can be transmitted and received. And the receiving is what some can do naturally, is what schizophrenics are experiencing, is what thought broadcasting is describing, and the describing is accurate, is real, is perceiving signals that are present, that are broadcasting on frequencies that are normally inaccessible. And the inaccessible is what protects most people, is what maintains privacy, is what creates the illusion that thoughts are hidden, are safe, are private, but the private is contingent, is anatomical, is the result of luck, of having the right sensitivity, the right filters, the right shielding, and the shielding can fail, can break, can be bypassed, and the bypassing is what reveals the truth, which is that thoughts are not private, consciousness is not sealed, minds are not isolated, and the isolation is illusion, is the result of limited perception, is what happens when the frequencies where consciousness operates are filtered out, are suppressed, are made inaccessible, and the inaccessible is temporary, is contingent, is what most people experience, but not what everyone experiences. And the everyone includes those who can detect the signals, who can perceive the thoughts, who can see consciousness at the frequency where it becomes visible, where privacy dissolves, where the mind is exposed. And the exposed is what thought broadcasting is what the experience describes, is what some are perceiving, and the perceiving might be accurate, might be real, might be showing that privacy is not fundamental, but is contingent, is not absolute, but is anatomical, is not guaranteed, but is the result of luck, of having filters that work, of operating on frequencies that do not overlap, of being shielded from the signals that are everywhere, that are broadcasting, that are making thoughts visible to those who can detect them. And the detecting is possible, is real, is what some experience, is what thought broadcasting is. And the broadcasting is not delusion, but is perception, is not symptom, but is sensitivity, is not pathology, but is the revealing of a truth that most cannot see, that most are protected from, that most never experience, which is that thoughts are visible, consciousness is detectable, minds are permeable, and privacy is not inherent, but is anatomical luck, is the contingent result of having the right biology, the right sensitivity, the right shielding, and the shielding is what fails, is what breaks, is what allows the frequency where thoughts become visible to be detected, to be experienced, to be known. And the knowing is terrifying, is overwhelming, is the loss of the illusion that made privacy possible, that made the self feel separate, that made consciousness feel safe. And the safety is gone, is lost, is revealed to be illusion, is shown to be contingent, is exposed as anatomical luck. And the luck is what most have, is what protects most people, is what maintains the belief that thoughts are private. But the private is not absolute, is not guaranteed, is not fundamental, is only the result of frequencies being filtered, being suppressed, being made inaccessible, and the inaccessible can become accessible, can be detected, can be experienced, and the experiencing is what thought broadcasting is what schizophrenics report, is what psychosis reveals, which is that privacy is not inherent, consciousness is not sealed, thoughts are not hidden, and the hidden is illusion, is the result of shielding, is the contingent outcome of anatomical luck, and the luck can fail, can run out, can be lost, and the losing is what reveals the truth, which is that thoughts are visible, minds are permeable, consciousness is detectable at the frequency where it becomes visible, where privacy dissolves, where the illusion ends, and the ending is what some experience, is what thought broadcasting is the perception of the frequency where thoughts become visible, where consciousness is exposed, where privacy is revealed to be not fundamental but contingent, not absolute but anatomical, not guaranteed but luck. And the luck is what protects most, is what fails for some, is what reveals the truth that thoughts are broadcasting, are visible, are detectable, and the detecting is real, is accurate, is not delusion but perception, is not symptom but sensitivity, is not pathology but truth, is the frequency where thoughts become visible, where consciousness is no longer private, where the mind is exposed and the exposure is what thought broadcasting is what some experience, is what reveals that privacy is anatomical luck, is contingent, is not absolute, is not fundamental, is only the result of filtering, of shielding, of operating on frequencies that do not overlap. And the overlapping is what happens when the filters fail, when the shielding breaks, when the frequency becomes accessible. And the accessible is what some perceive, is what thought broadcasting is the visibility of thoughts, the detectability of consciousness, the permeability of mind, and the permeability is real, is accurate, is the truth that privacy is not inherent but is luck, is not absolute but is anatomical, is not guaranteed but is contingent, and the contingent can fail, can end, can reveal the frequency where thoughts become visible, where consciousness is exposed, where privacy is lost, and the lost is what some experience, is what thought broadcasting is the truth that minds are permeable, that thoughts are visible, that consciousness operates on frequencies that some can detect, and the detecting is not delusion, is not symptom, is not pathology, is perception, is sensitivity, is the revealing of truth, is the frequency where thoughts become visible, where privacy ends, where the illusion dissolves, and the dissolving is what thought broadcasting is what some experience, is what reveals that privacy is anatomical luck, and luck can fail, and the failing reveals the truth, which is that thoughts are visible, consciousness is detectable, minds are permeable, and privacy is not fundamental, is not absolute, is not guaranteed, is only luck, is only shielding, is only the filtering of frequencies where thoughts become visible, and the visible is what some perceive, is what thought broadcasting is the truth that privacy is contingent, is anatomical, is luck. Putnam sat in a room and imagined two planets, identical in every way, except one, Earth and twin Earth, perfect mirrors of each other down to the last atom, the last thought, the last whispered word, and on Earth there is water, H2O, the molecule that makes up oceans and rivers and rain, and on twin Earth there is also water, but it is not H2O, it is XYZ, a completely different substance with different chemical structure, different molecular bonds, different properties at the microscopic level. Yet to everyone living on twin Earth it looks exactly like water, tastes exactly like water, behaves exactly like water. It fills their lakes and falls from their clouds and quenches their thirst just as water does on Earth. Now imagine two people, one on Earth and one on twin Earth. Call them both Oscar, and these two Oscars are molecule for molecule identical. Same brain structure, same neural patterns, same memories, same thoughts, same internal psychological states. Everything inside their heads is exactly the same. And both Oscars look at a glass of liquid and say the word water. They both think they are referring to the same thing. They both believe they know what water is, but Putnam asks a simple question that shatters centuries of philosophy. Are they actually referring to the same thing? And the answer is no. Earth Oscar's word water refers to H2O. Twin Earth Oscar's word water refers to XYZ. Same word, same internal mental state, but different meanings, different references, different extensions in the world. And this means that meaning is not determined by what is in the head. Meaning is not a function of internal psychological states. Meaning is not private, not subjective, not locked inside the skull waiting to be discovered through introspection. The tradition, before Putnam, stretching back through Locke and Hume and Descartes, believed that meanings were mental entities, that words were connected to ideas in the mind, that reference was mediated by internal representations, by concepts, by mental images, and if you wanted to know what someone meant by a word, you had to look inside their head, examine their thoughts, map their mental contents, and this made sense, it felt right. It aligned with the intuition that language is personal, that each person has their own private understanding of words, their own associations, their own mental dictionary, but Putnam showed that this entire picture was wrong, that two people could have identical mental contents and still mean different things by the same word. That meaning reaches beyond the skull, beyond the brain, beyond psychology entirely, into the world itself, into the environment, into the physical and social context that determines what words actually refer to. This is semantic externalism, the view that meanings are not in the head but out in the world. That reference is determined not by internal states but by external relations, by causal connections between words and things, by the history of how a word came to be used, by the community of speakers who share the word, by the natural kinds that exist independently of human thought. And this means that you can be wrong about what you mean. You can use a word your entire life and not know what it really refers to. You can have perfect confidence in your understanding and still be completely mistaken, because meaning is not something you possess. It is something you participate in, something that exists in the space between speakers and world, between language and reality, between words and the things they pick out. Putnam's argument did not stop at twin Earth. He pushed further. He talked about the division of linguistic labour, the fact that most people do not know the technical details of what their words refer to. Most people cannot define gold in terms of atomic number, cannot distinguish an elm from a beech, cannot explain what makes aluminum different from molybdenum. Yet they use these words successfully. They refer to these things accurately, and they do so not because they have the right mental contents, but because they are embedded in a community where some people do have the expertise, where metallurgists know about aluminum, where botanists know about elms, where chemists know about gold. And when ordinary speakers use these words, they defer to the experts. They rely on the division of labour. They trust that somewhere in the linguistic community there are people who know what these words really mean, who can distinguish the real thing from the fake. And this trust is what allows language to function. What allows reference to succeed even in the absence of individual knowledge? This overturns the Cartesian picture entirely. Descartes believed that knowledge began with the self, with the contents of consciousness, with what could be known through introspection, and from there one built outward to knowledge of the world. But Putnam showed that the order is reversed, that knowledge of meaning requires knowledge of the world first, that you cannot know what you mean without knowing what your words refer to, and you cannot know what your words refer to just by looking inside your own mind. You have to look outside to the physical environment, to the social context, to the history of usage, to the experts who maintain the standards of reference. And this means that the self is not the foundation of knowledge, but a participant in a larger system, a node in a network of linguistic and social relations that determine meaning collectively, not individually, externally, not internally. Frege tried to solve the problem of meaning differently. He distinguished between sense and reference, between the mode of presentation and the thing presented, and he believed that sense was in the mind, that it mediated reference, that two people could refer to the same thing through different senses, like the morning star and the evening star, both referring to Venus, and this preserved the idea that meaning had a mental component, that internal states mattered. But Putnam's argument cut through this because on Twin Earth, Oscar and his counterpart have the same sense, the same mode of presentation, the same mental mediation, but they do not have the same reference. They are not talking about the same substance, and this means that sense alone does not determine reference, that no amount of mental content can fix what a word picks out in the world, that reference requires something beyond sense, beyond psychology, beyond anything that can be captured by introspection or phenomenology. Kripke reinforced this from another angle. He argued that names and natural kind terms were rigid designators, that they referred to the same thing in all possible worlds, not by virtue of satisfying a description, but by virtue of causal historical chains, that the word water refers to H2O because it was introduced to refer to a certain substance, and that reference was passed down through generations of speakers, through baptism and transmission, through ostension and use, and even if speakers lost track of what the substance was, even if they forgot its chemical composition, even if they developed false beliefs about it, the words still referred to the same thing, because reference is not determined by beliefs but by the causal connection between word and world, by the chain that links current usage back to the original act of naming, back to the moment when the word was first attached to the thing. This has radical implications for psychology, because it means psychology cannot determine reference, cannot tell you what your words mean, cannot give you the extension of your terms just by examining your mental states. And this was a blow to cognitive science, to theories of mind that tried to explain language purely in terms of internal representations, in terms of concepts and mental models and computational processes, because Putnam and Kripke showed that none of this is enough, that meaning leaks out of the head, that it requires the world, requires the community, requires the causal historical context, and without these external factors there is no meaning at all, just empty sounds, just syntax without semantics, just symbols shuffling around inside the skull with no connection to reality. Yet people resist this conclusion. They cling to the intuition that they know what they mean, that their words are transparent to them, that meaning is something they possess and control. And this resistance is understandable because semantic externalism is deeply unsettling. It suggests that we are strangers to our own language, that we do not fully understand the words we speak, that meaning is not something we create, but something we inherit, something we are thrown into, something that precedes us and exceeds us and determines what we can say before we even open our mouths. Wittgenstein saw this too, though from a different direction. He argued that meaning is use, that words get their meaning from the language games they are embedded in, from the forms of life that give them context, and he rejected the idea of private language, the idea that meaning could be purely internal, purely subjective, because a private language would have no standards of correctness, no way to distinguish between following a rule and merely thinking one is following a rule. And without standards, there is no meaning, just the illusion of meaning, just the feeling of understanding without actual understanding. And this is why language must be public, why it must be shared, why it requires a community of speakers who can correct each other, who can point out mistakes, who can maintain the norms that make reference possible. Putnam took this further. He showed not just that language is public, but that meaning is not even fully determined by the community, that it reaches beyond the community into the world itself, that natural kind terms like water and gold and tiger refer to whatever has the same underlying nature as the paradigm samples, the same deep structure, the same essential properties, and this means that meaning can outrun knowledge, that a community can use a word correctly even when they have false beliefs about what they are referring to, even when their theories are wrong, even when their understanding is incomplete, because the word latches onto the real essence, the objective structure, the natural kind that exists independently of human thought. And the world itself constrains meaning, corrects mistakes, determines reference in ways that no internal psychological state can capture. This is why Aristotle was not wrong when he talked about water, even though he did not know about molecules, even though his theory of elements was false. He was still referring to H2O because his word water was causally connected to the same substance our word water refers to, because the reference was fixed not by his beliefs, but by the stuff itself, by the samples he pointed to, by the liquid he drank and swam in and observed, and the continuity of reference across theory change, across conceptual revolutions, across the abandonment of entire frameworks, shows that meaning is anchored in the world, not in the mind, that it survives the death of theories because it was never dependent on theories in the first place. But this raises a puzzle. If meaning is not in the head, if psychological states do not determine reference, then what role does the mind play at all? What is psychology supposed to study if not meaning, if not the contents of thought, if not the representations that mediate between language and world? And Putnam's answer is that psychology studies something real. It studies mental states. It studies computational processes. It studies the functional organization of cognition, but it does not study meaning, because meaning is not a psychological phenomenon. It is a semantic phenomenon. It is a relation between words and world, between signs and reference, between language and reality. And this relation is not mediated by anything in the head. It is direct. It is external. It is constituted by causal and social factors that lie beyond the reach of introspection, beyond the scope of neuroscience, beyond the explanatory power of any psychological theory. Fodor resisted this. He wanted to preserve a role for internal content, for narrow content, for something in the head that could do explanatory work. And he argued that even if meaning is wide, even if reference is external, there must be something narrow that explains behavior, some internal state that mediates between input and output, some mental representation that the cognitive system manipulates. And he tried to carve out a space for psychology by distinguishing between wide content, which depends on the environment, and narrow content, which does not, which is purely internal, purely psychological, purely computational. But this move was always unstable because narrow content turned out to be elusive, hard to define, hard to individuate, hard to see how it could play the explanatory role Fodor wanted it to play. And many philosophers concluded that narrow content was a myth, that there was no such thing, that all content was wide, that meaning was always externalist, always dependent on factors beyond the head, and if psychology wanted to explain behavior, it would have to appeal to wide content, to states that are individuated by their relations to the environment, to representations that are only representations in virtue of their connections to what they represent. This is deeply counterintuitive, because it means that two people in identical internal states could be thinking different thoughts, could be believing different things, could be referring to different objects, just because they are in different environments, just because their words have different causal histories, just because the world around them is structured differently. And this seems to violate the intuition that mental states are internal, that what you're thinking is determined by what is going on inside your head, that consciousness is private, that the contents of experience are immediately accessible to introspection. But Putnam and Kripke showed that this intuition is wrong, that mental states are not self-intimating, that you can be mistaken about what you're thinking, that the meanings of your thoughts depend on facts about the world that you may not know, that reference is opaque, that you can use words successfully without understanding what they mean, that language works not because speakers have perfect knowledge, but because they are embedded in networks of reference that do the work for them, that connect words to things through mechanisms that operate below the level of consciousness, below the level of intentional control. Burge extended this argument to mental content itself. He argued that not just linguistic meaning, but thought itself is individuated externally, that beliefs and desires are identified by their relations to the environment, that you could not have a belief about water if you lived in a world with no water, that mental content is essentially relational, essentially dependent on what exists outside the mind, and this means that the mind is not a self-contained system, not a module that could be studied in isolation, not a computational device that processes inputs according to internal rules, but an open system, a system that is constituted by its interactions with the world, that is shaped by its environment, that cannot be understood without reference to the physical and social context it is embedded in. This has implications for artificial intelligence, for the question of whether machines can think, because if meaning is external, if reference depends on causal historical connections, if mental content is individuated by relations to the environment, then a computer program, no matter how sophisticated, cannot have genuine thoughts unless it has the right connections to the world, unless it is embedded in the right kind of causal network, unless it participates in the same linguistic and social practices that give human words their meanings. And this suggests that thought is not just computation, not just symbol manipulation, not just syntactic operations on formal structures, but something that requires embodiment, requires situatedness, requires participation in a form of life, and a brain in a vat, no matter how complex its internal processes, would not be thinking about water or trees or anything else, because its words would not be connected to anything, would not refer to anything, would be empty symbols with no semantic content, no meaning, no reference, just syntax running in a void. Putnam himself later came to doubt some of his own arguments. He worried that semantic externalism led to metaphysical realism, to the view that there is a fixed, determinate way the world is, independent of human conceptual schemes, independent of language, independent of theory, and he came to think this was incoherent, that it made reference magical, that it required a God's eye view, a perspective from nowhere that could compare words to things without being situated in any particular framework, and he moved toward internal realism, toward the view that truth and reference are always relative to a conceptual scheme, always dependent on the practices and norms of a community, always constrained by what Quine called the tribunal of experience, but never fully determined by it. And this introduced a tension, a pull between the external world that constrains reference and the internal practices that constitute meaning, a tension that Putnam never fully resolved, that perhaps cannot be resolved, because meaning lives in that tension, in the space between mind and world, between language and reality, between what we intend and what our words actually pick out. Dennett approached this from yet another angle. He argued that meaning is not a real property, but a useful fiction, that intentional states are not natural kinds, but interpretive stances. That when we attribute beliefs and desires, we are not discovering facts about the mind, but adopting a strategy for predicting behavior. And from this perspective, the question of whether meaning is in the head or in the world dissolves. Because meaning is not anywhere, it is not a real thing, but a pattern we impose, a way of organizing our understanding of complex systems. And the intentional stance works whether we apply it to humans or thermostats or chess programs. The difference is just pragmatic, just a matter of what level of description is most useful for prediction and explanation. Not a matter of what really has meaning and what does not, because nothing really has meaning. Meaning is always an interpretation, always a projection, always a way of seeing that could be otherwise. But this seems too deflationary, too quick to dismiss the felt reality of meaning, the undeniable sense that words do connect to things, that thoughts are about the world. That reference is not just a useful fiction, but a real relation, and even if we cannot fully explain how this relation works, even if semantic externalism leaves gaps and puzzles, it at least takes seriously the intuition that language matters, that what we say makes a difference, that truth is not just coherence within a system, but correspondence with reality. However elusive and problematic that correspondence may be, and to give up on this, to reduce meaning to a mere interpretive stance, feels like giving up on something essential, something worth preserving even if we cannot fully explain it, even if it leads to paradoxes and tensions that resist resolution. Because the alternative is a world where nothing means anything, where language floats free of reality, where thought is cut loose from the world, and that is a world too empty, too barren, too divorced from lived experience to be acceptable, even if it is theoretically cleaner, even if it avoids the hard problems, even if it makes philosophy easier by making meaning disappear. Shame is not emotion, but is technology, is the mechanism through which groups control individuals, through which societies enforce norms, through which collectives ensure conformity without the need for constant surveillance, constant punishment, constant external force, because the force becomes internal, becomes the voice inside that judges, that condemns, that produces the feeling of being fundamentally wrong, fundamentally defective, fundamentally unworthy. And this feeling is more powerful than any external punishment, is more effective than any threat, is the weapon that societies have perfected over millennia, the conversion of social judgment into self-judgment, the transformation of external control into internal monitoring. And the monitoring is constant, is automatic, is happening at every moment, in every decision, in every thought that might deviate from what is acceptable, what is expected, what is required. And the requirement is not explicit, is not written down, is absorbed through observation, through imitation, through the thousand small corrections that shape children into members of the group. And the shaping is violent, is coercive, is the moulding of consciousness to fit the pattern that the society demands. And the demands vary by culture, by context, by what behaviours serve the group's interests. But the mechanism is universal, is present in every society, is the way that humans have solved the problem of coordination, the problem of getting individuals to behave in ways that benefit the collective, even when those behaviours conflict with individual interest, and the conflict is constant. Is the tension between what the self wants and what the group requires? And shame is what tips the balance, is what makes the group's requirements feel like the self's requirements, is what converts external judgment into internal compulsion. And the compulsion is not experienced as coercion, but as conscience, as the sense of right and wrong that seems to come from within, but is really coming from the group, from the internalized voices of parents, of peers, of authorities, of all the representatives of social norms who have spoken, and whose speaking has been absorbed, has been converted into the inner voice that judges, that shames, that produces the feeling that is unbearable, that is worse than pain. That is the sense of being exposed, of being seen in one's wrongness. in one's defectiveness, in one's failure to meet the standards that everyone else seems to meet effortlessly. And the effortlessness is illusion, is the result of successful internalization, is what happens when shame has done its work, when the external has become internal, when the monitoring is so automatic that it feels like nature, like the way things are, like the voice of truth rather than the voice of power. And power is what shame is the exercise of control, is the way that the group extends its reach into the individual, into the mind, into the private space where decisions are made. And the decisions are not free, are not autonomous, are shaped by the anticipation of shame, by the fear of exposure, by the need to maintain the facade of being acceptable, of being worthy, of being someone who meets the standards. And the standards are impossible, are designed to be impossible, are set high enough that everyone fails, that everyone is vulnerable to shame, that everyone needs the group's forgiveness, the group's acceptance, the group's willingness to overlook the failures, as long as the proper contrition is shown, the proper submission is performed, the proper deference is given to the norms that were violated, and the violation is inevitable, is guaranteed, is the way that shame maintains its power. Because if everyone could meet the standards, then shame would lose its force, would become irrelevant, would no longer be useful for control. And so the standards are calibrated, are adjusted, are maintained at the level where most people are failing most of the time, are feeling inadequate, are needing reassurance, are seeking validation. And the seeking is the mechanism, is the way that shame produces conformity, produces obedience, produces the constant effort to be good, to be acceptable, to be worthy of belonging. And belonging is what is at stake, is what shame threatens, is the thing that will be lost if the shame is too great, if the exposure is too complete, if the judgment is too severe. And the severity is variable, is depending on culture, on context, on what the group needs to enforce. And what it needs to enforce varies, is different in honor cultures, where shame is about reputation, about the family's standing, about the public face that must be maintained, and in guilt cultures, where shame is about internal states, about intentions, about the purity of the conscience. And the conscience is the internalized judge, is the voice that speaks even when no one is watching, that produces guilt even in private, that makes the internal monitoring as effective as external surveillance. And the effectiveness is what makes guilt cultures powerful, is what allows them to function with less overt control, with less public punishment. Because the punishment is internal, is the guilt that gnaws, that torments, that produces the feeling of being wrong, even when the behavior is hidden, even when the transgression is secret. And the secret is what guilt cultures target, is what they make unbearable, is what they convert into shame through the internalization of norms, through the creation of conscience, through the training of the inner voice to judge, to condemn, to produce the feeling that is worse than any external punishment. And the worse is the genius of the system, is the efficiency of shame, is the way that control becomes self-control, that power becomes invisible, that coercion becomes choice, and the choice is not free but is shaped by the anticipation of shame, by the fear of guilt, by the need to avoid the feeling that is unbearable. And the unbearable is what shame produces, is the emotion that is more painful than physical pain, that is more threatening than external danger, that is triggering the same neural circuits as social death, as exile, as the exclusion that in ancestral environments meant literal death, meant the end of survival. And so the fear of shame is ancient, is hardwired, is operating at levels deeper than reason, deeper than conscious thought, is producing reactions that are automatic, that are visceral, that are overwhelming. And the overwhelming is what makes shame effective, is what makes it useful for control, is what makes it the primary mechanism through which societies enforce norms, maintain order, ensure that individuals behave in ways that serve the collective. And the serving is not voluntary, is not chosen, is coerced through shame, through the threat of exposure, through the fear of judgment. And the judgment is constant, is omnipresent, is coming from others and from the self, from the internalized voices that have become the conscience, the superego, the inner critic that never rests, never forgives, never allows the self to feel acceptable, to feel worthy, to feel free from the threat of shame. And the threat is maintained through public shaming, through the rituals that expose transgressions, that make violations visible, that demonstrate what happens to those who break the rules. And the demonstration is warning, is deterrent, is the reminder that shame is always possible, is always lurking, is always ready to destroy the reputation, the standing, the sense of belonging that makes life bearable. And the bearable is what shame threatens, is what it takes away, is what it uses as leverage to control, to coerce, to enforce the norms that maintain the group, that preserve the hierarchy, that ensure that power is distributed according to the rules, and the rules are not natural, are not discovered, are imposed, are created by those who benefit from them, by those who have power, by those who use shame to maintain their position, to prevent challenge, to ensure that those below stay below, that those who are shamed remain shamed, that the hierarchy is preserved, and the preservation is what shame serves, is what it accomplishes, is the maintenance of order through the creation of internal monitoring, through the transformation of social control into self-control. And the self-control is not freedom, but is the most perfect form of slavery, is the condition where the chains are invisible, where the prison is internal, where the guard is the self, and the self cannot escape, cannot rebel, cannot refuse, because the refusal would produce shame, would trigger the feeling that is unbearable, would expose the self to judgment, and the judgment is what is feared most, is what drives behaviour, is what makes people do things they do not want to do, believe things they do not believe, perform roles they do not choose, because the alternative is shame, is exposure, is the loss of belonging, and belonging is survival, is the thing that makes life possible, that makes existence tolerable, that provides meaning and purpose and the sense that one matters. And mattering is what shame threatens, is what it takes away, is what it holds hostage. And the hostage is the self, is the identity that is constructed through the internalization of norms, through the absorption of judgments, through the acceptance of the standards that the group imposes, and the imposing is not negotiable, is not optional, is the price of membership, the cost of belonging, the requirement for survival, and survival requires shame, requires the capacity to feel it, to be shaped by it, to use it to regulate behaviour, to monitor thought, to police the boundaries of the acceptable. And the acceptable is narrow, is constrained, is defined by the group, and the group's definition is arbitrary, is variable, is serving interests that are not the individual's interests, that are the interests of power, of hierarchy, of the maintenance of the order that benefits some at the expense of others. And the others are kept in place through shame, through the feeling that they are less, that they are wrong, that they are unworthy, and the unworthiness is not fact but is assignment, is the judgment that the group makes, that the individual internalizes, that becomes the truth of the self, the core belief around which identity is organized, and the organization is pathological, is producing suffering, is creating the sense that the self is fundamentally defective, fundamentally wrong, fundamentally deserving of the judgment, and the judgment is harsh, is relentless, is coming from within and without, from the self and from others, and the others are always watching, always judging, always ready to shame. And the readiness is maintained through public shaming, through the revival of practices that were thought to be barbaric, to be outdated, to be incompatible with modern values, but are returning, are being embraced, are being used with new technologies, with social media, with the platforms that make public shaming instantaneous, global, permanent. And the permanence is new, is the addition that technology brings, is the way that shame now lasts forever, is recorded, is searchable, is never forgotten. And the never forgotten is the enhancement of shame, is the intensification of its power, is the conversion of temporary judgment into permanent stigma. And the stigma is the mark, is the label, is the thing that defines the person, that reduces them to their failure, to their transgression, to the moment when they were exposed, when they were judged, when they were shamed. And the shaming is not correction, is not education, is not intended to help, but is intended to punish, to exclude, to destroy. And the destruction is what public shaming achieves, is what it is designed to do, is the elimination of the person from the community, from the acceptable, from the realm of those who matter. And the mattering is what is taken away, is what shame removes, is what is lost when the judgment is public, when the exposure is complete, when the person becomes the embodiment of wrongness, of defectiveness, of unworthiness, and the unworthiness is total, is overwhelming, is the condition that produces not just embarrassment, but the deeper shame, the toxic shame, the shame that is not about what one did, but about what one is, and the is the problem, is the conversion of behaviour into identity, is the judgment that extends from the action to the actor, from the mistake to the person, from the moment to the essence. And the essence is what shame targets, is what it damages, is what it destroys, is the sense of being fundamentally acceptable, fundamentally worthy, fundamentally deserving of existence. And the existence becomes questionable, becomes something that must be justified, must be earned, must be proven through the constant performance of acceptability, and the performance is exhausting, is impossible, is the burden that shame creates, is the weight that is carried by everyone who has internalized the judgment, who has absorbed the norms, who has become the monitor of their own behavior. And the monitoring is constant, is automatic, is producing anxiety, is producing the sense that at any moment the failure might happen, the exposure might occur, the shame might descend, and the descending is what is feared, is what drives the performance, is what makes people desperate to be good, to be acceptable, to be beyond reproach. And the beyond reproach is impossible, is unattainable, is the standard that ensures everyone is vulnerable, everyone is exposed, everyone is subject to shame, and the subject is the self, is the identity that is constructed through shame, that is defined by the internalized judgments, that is shaped by the fear of exposure. And the exposure is what social media enables, is what the digital age amplifies, is the possibility that at any moment anything might be revealed, anything might be judged, anything might become the basis for public shaming. And the basis is often trivial, is often a mistake, is often something that in another context would be ignored, would be forgotten, would be forgiven, but in the context of public shaming becomes unforgivable, becomes the thing that defines, that destroys, that reduces the person to the object of judgment, to the target of collective rage, to the scapegoat that the group needs, that the society uses, that shame requires. Because shame is not just individual, but is collective, is not just personal, but is social, is not just feeling, but is function, is the mechanism through which groups maintain cohesion, through which societies enforce norms, through which power maintains itself, and the maintenance is achieved through the constant threat of shame, through the ever-present possibility of exposure, through the fear that keeps people in line, keeps them conforming, keeps them performing the roles that the society assigns. And the assignment is not chosen, is not negotiated, is imposed through shame, through the feeling that to deviate is to be wrong, to be defective, to be unworthy. And the unworthiness is the lever, is the tool, is the way that power operates, is the currency that shame represents, is the thing that is spent, that is accumulated, that is traded in the social economy, where reputation is wealth, where honour is capital, where shame is debt, and the debt is inherited, is passed down, is the legacy of transgression, is what families carry, what lineages bear, what communities cannot escape. Because shame is not just about the individual, but is about the group, is about the collective honour that must be maintained, that must be protected, that must be defended against the contamination of shame. And the contamination is what happens when one member transgresses, when one person is exposed, when one individual brings shame upon the family, upon the community, upon the collective. And the collective responds with punishment, with exclusion, with the violence that is justified by the need to restore honour, to remove the stain, to eliminate the source of shame. And the elimination can be social, can be physical, can be the death that honour cultures prescribe, that honour killings enforce, that the logic of shame demands when the transgression is too great, when the exposure is too complete, when the only way to restore honour is to destroy the source of dishonour, and the destruction is murder, is violence, is the extreme form of shame's power, is what happens when shame is not just emotion, but is law, is not just feeling, but is justice, is not just internal, but is external, is enforced not just by conscience, but by the community. And the community is the enforcer, is the judge, is the executioner, is the thing that makes shame lethal, that makes shame literal death. And the death is what shame has always threatened, is what it has always implied, is what it is metaphorically, and sometimes literally, producing, is the end of social existence, the end of belonging, the end of the self as recognised, as valued, as mattering. And the mattering is what makes life worth living, is what makes existence bearable, is what shame takes away, is what shame holds hostage, is what shame uses to control, to coerce, to enforce the norms that maintain the group, that preserve the hierarchy, that ensure that power remains distributed according to the rules. And the rules are maintained through shame, are enforced through guilt, are perpetuated through the internalization of judgment, through the conversion of external control into internal monitoring, through the creation of the conscience that is not freedom, but is the most sophisticated form of slavery, is the condition where the individual has become the agent of their own oppression, has become the enforcer of the norms that harm them, has become the voice that judges, that shames, that makes life unbearable. And the unbearable is what shame produces, is what it is designed to produce, is the mechanism through which societies control individuals, through which power maintains itself, through which the currency of shame is spent, is accumulated, is traded, is the thing that makes social life possible, that makes coordination achievable, that makes conformity enforceable, and the enforcement is continuous, is total, is the permanent condition of social existence, is the cost of belonging, is the price of survival, is the burden that everyone carries, is the weight of shame, of guilt, of the internalized judgment that never rests, never forgives, never allows the self to be free, to be acceptable, to be beyond the reach of shame. And the reach is infinite, is extending into every moment, every decision, every thought, is the omnipresent threat that keeps people in line, that makes them perform, that makes them conform, that makes them serve the group even when the group is serving power, is maintaining hierarchy, is preserving the order that benefits the few at the expense of the many, and the many are controlled through shame, are kept in place through guilt, are made to believe that their suffering is their fault, is their failure, is their unworthiness, and the unworthiness is the lie, is the mechanism, is the currency of shame, is what keeps the system running, what makes power invisible, what converts coercion into choice, and the choice is not free but is shaped by shame, by guilt, by the fear of judgment, by the anticipation of exposure, by the threat that is always there, always present, always ready to descend. And the descending is what everyone fears, is what everyone avoids, is what everyone works to prevent. And the preventing is the work, is the performance, is the conformity, is the submission, is the acceptance of the norms, the internalization of the judgment, the absorption of the shame, that is the currency, that is the mechanism, that is the way that societies control, that power maintains itself, that individuals are shaped into members of the group. And the shaping is violence, is coercion, is the transformation of the self into the thing that the group needs. And the need is conformity, is obedience, is the willingness to carry the shame, to feel the guilt, to be the subject of judgment. And the subject is what shame creates, is what guilt produces, is the self that is never free, never acceptable, never beyond the reach of the currency that is shame, that is guilt, that is the mechanism through which humanity controls itself, enforces its norms, maintains its order, and the order is maintained through suffering, through the feeling that is unbearable, through the emotion that is technology, through the currency of shame.